The progressives saw private interest, as the enemy of the people, the enemy of Americans. And the only protection they could see against this could possibly come from the government. But there was a problem with this idea, and that was the government wasn't really set up to work this way. Progressives saw the political parties as having been corrupted by these private interests and in service to them and not to the people. And so they decide to attack the party system itself. We've already seen a lot of this. The Greenback Party, the Populists, the Mugwumps. These are all challenges to what those people saw as a corrupted two-party system. Now, at this time, at the beginning of this period, voting was done often with pre-filled out ballots. And so party leaders, particularly in the cities, would go around and hand out ballots that already had all the candidates filled in. And then you were supposed to just go down and hand your pre-filled out ballot in. And that way they could ensure that people voted the way they wanted them to vote. But by the 1890s, most states had gone away from this towards a secret ballot where you walked in and filled the ballot out on your own. This prevented parties from knowing who voted for who, and it severely undermined their ability to control the population, because somebody could simply say, oh yeah, I totally support you, and get all the benefits of being a supporter, and then go into the booth and vote for somebody else. The heart of corruption at the time was actually in local politics. Cities were probably the most corrupt part of the political machine. Lincoln Steffens, the muckraker we talked about, wrote Shame of the Cities and really brought this to people's attention. And so progressives will attack the political machines of the cities. In 1900, when a tidal wave destroys the city of Galveston, Texas, the city government simply collapses. It can't handle it. It can't respond to this. Reformers will adopt a new city charter, and they'll create a new form of city government, a nonpartisan, meaning the candidates aren't declared as Republicans or Democrats, commission. In 1907, and they would have a lot of success in getting Galveston back on its feet. In 1907, Des Moines, Iowa will follow suit, and the idea begins to spread throughout the country. And even still today, many cities don't have party affiliation at the city government level. I live in Austin. We don't have party affiliation at the city level here. Another model that is developed by progressives is the city manager plan. And this involves electing a board who hires a trained civil engineer to run the city. And so you have a technocrat as opposed to a politician actually in charge of the city. By 1920, 400 cities are using the Galveston Commission model, and 45 cities are using the city manager model. Some cities even have nonpartisan mayoral elections, and they often have them in off years, maybe odd-numbered years, so you don't get all that push from presidential elections as people just coming out to vote straight ticket. They also create the at-large seats. So instead of having each seat represent particular neighborhoods, you have seats represent everybody. And this weakened the ward system, which is where local political machines would control individual neighborhoods in order to control the government overall in the city. Strong mayors are easier to elect than an entire council, so very often strong mayors, if they were reform-minded, could do more good than a council. State governments were much more party-controlled, actually, and were also targeted by reformers. Some of these measures would be things like initiative and referendum. Initiative is where voters can propose laws and then they vote on them, and it doesn't involve the state legislature or the governor. California these days is overrun with initiatives, but we'll talk about that later. By 1918, more than 20 states have initiative and referendum. Referendum is where the voters can undo a law. So, and these have been happening a lot lately here in these days. This is where the state government passes a law and voters can vote to undo that law. We also begin to see strong primary systems, and so the candidates begin to be elected by the people, chosen by the people, and not simply chosen by the party bosses. Finally, we have recall. Recall is when voters in a state can remove an elected politician from office. Now, until very recently, recall almost never happened. There's been quite a bit of it lately. But it was a threat to politicians that if they did something that made the people too angry, they could be recalled from office. By 1915, every state has adopted a primary, and a handful of states have adopted recall. You can look on the map there and you can see where it was. But what you'll see is primarily this is going to happen in the West and a little bit in the Midwest. Robert La Follette, the governor of Wisconsin, he's a Democrat, declared that Wisconsin would be the laboratory of democracy and began to implement all kinds of new radical progressive ideas. Things like regulating the workplace for safety, paying workers if they were injured, or having the company pay workers if they were injured, what today we call workers' compensation. You see there the before and after picture of the corporation strangling the people, and after everything is nice and sweet. A graduated income tax. This is where wealthier people pay more in taxes than poorer people. An inheritance tax, so that when people die with vast fortunes, some of that is taxed. This doesn't apply to it only applies to the top few percent of the population. It wouldn't apply to most of the people listening to me. And they also began putting corporate taxes, taxing railroads and corporations. All these were ways to try to use the state government as a way of protecting the people and helping the people, as opposed to helping the powerful moneyed interest. Party power declines. Voting also declines. In 1896, 81% of voters voted. In 1900, that falls to 73%. By 1912, it's down to 59%. And it will never again break 70%. As parties lose the ability to control their voters because of the secret ballot primarily, people have less motivation to vote, and you actually see voting go down. The party and their affiliation with powerful groups is replaced by special interests who come in and take on the party roles. Professional organizations, unions, trade associations, farm lobbies, as well as social workers and the progressive reformers themselves, all begin to develop elaborate mechanisms for influencing and controlling politicians to get their way. And so that ends up kind of being outsourced from the party itself to these interest groups who are now trying to control the party from the outside as opposed to from the inside. So it turns out we didn't get rid of corruption once and for all as the progressives had hoped.